Well, hello, class number 5. How are y'all doing? Hope you're well. This is going to be physical geography. We're going to be looking, this is video 14. We're going to be going over natural resources and what I like to label God's gifts to man. So, these are the things that God has provided. Again, I'll be doing some of the reading. I'll have you do some of the reading. And then there'll be some questions for you to answer. Some of them will be straight out of the reading. Some of them you'll have to think about and reason through. On your assignment page, I put on there which one is a reasoning question and which one, well, it says reasoning, or if it's discussed in the video. If not, you'll find it directly in the reading. Excuse me. So let's get started. It says in January 2008, so follow along. Oh, I'm sorry, we're on page 61. Well, it says natural resources. We're going to start with this one. It says in January 2008, the price for a barrel of crude oil reached $100 for the first time in history. It's currently about $45 per barrel. Prices have been relatively low for some time, lingering below $40 per barrel. So that is a more than double increase. So if you were in the oil industry, you're doing good. Driven by increased production cost and stronger than ever demand, prices rose dramatically through the early months of 2008. I remember this was in 2008, I was living in Venezuela, but even when I came back and moved to California in 2009, there were parts of California in 2009 that were paying over $4 and $5 per gallon of gas. Now, that hurts your pocketbook. Driven by, during summer, oil prices typically jump or take due to higher demand as families move or take vacations during these months. And 2008 was no exception. Already painful prices skyrocketed even higher, and the businesses and regular citizens alike paid the price at the gas pump. So it rose, and if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly, it was some places it was even over $6 a gallon. For a 30-gallon tank, that's close to $200. Yeah, to fill it up. It says in mid-July, a barrel of crude oil topped out at $147 per barrel, the highest price ever recorded. So it got up to $147 per barrel. Now, I'm going to describe to you something that happened. So I am very familiar with the nation of Venezuela. That's where my wife is from. 100% of their oil industry, which used to be huge, is controlled by the government. So all of the money that they got in from oil went straight to the government. And the government, it's a socialistic government, so government pays for everything, and people end up losing jobs. And Venezuela right now is one of the poorest nations in the world and has the highest inflation in the world, and it's been absolutely tragic to watch. It's been very sad. But this is what happens. And during that time when oil prices were so high, even when they were at $100 a barrel, the government was able to pay for a lot because they were making a lot of money. Now that that price has dropped, the government no longer has that money coming in, and thus the people, all of that money that was being given to the people and financing different things and stuff like that, that has disappeared, leaving the nation in poverty and ruin. So that is what you can see is the possible effects of increases and decreases to natural resources, especially when it's controlled by the government. But even when it's not controlled by the government, it can have, depending on which natural resource it is, it can have a dramatic effect on the lives of people within nations. If there is a major, say for instance, there's a major change in the price of rice, let's say for China produces a lot of rice. So if there's a major change in that price, it's going to affect their income quite a bit. If the price of rice goes down quite a bit, then it's going to go down. If it goes up, then they're going to make more money. But that's how it can affect a nation. So let's keep going. It says Americans were not the only ones affected, despite paying nearly $5 a gallon for fuel in some markets. In Europe and throughout Asia, prices soared, and the topic became the primary news event of the summer because of businesses scaled. Excuse me for one moment. Let me do this real quick. Sorry about that. So it says, scaled back transportation, airlines jacked up prices because imagine your fuel price doubling. That means somebody's got to pay for it. Ends up being the consumer. And subsequently took huge losses, and many commuters discovered a mass land transit for the first time. So again, let's think about oil. So I'm going to go back. Oh, actually, let's keep going. As fuel demand gradually tapered off during the late summer and in the fall, prices did as well. At the outset of 2009, many Americans were paying for gasoline half what they had paid just 6 months earlier. Predictably, much of the outcry over the high prices was directed at OPEC, the consortium or group of oil-producing nations located primarily in the Middle East. As relations between the U.S. and many OPEC countries are often tense, many Americans accuse OPEC of price gouging. So price gouging is selling of goods or services at an unreasonably high amount. So, for example, let's say there was a bad hurricane that hit Florida, and it was very hard to find generators, electric generators. So let's say typically a generator cost $150. You'd be price gouging if you owned a bunch of generators and you were selling them for like $600 a piece, way over the real amount, just because you could take advantage of it. It says in some instances throughout history, there have been some truths to these claims. This time, however, it was likely the Middle Eastern hostility by sheer circumstance. Global oil demand had been rising as Westerners consumed more and more. Developing countries like China, India, and Brazil became increasingly industrialized. So as you become industrialized, they were using more gas. Production prices had also risen steadily, and oil companies sought to recoup some of that loss via higher prices. And to that, a catastrophic hurricane season in the U.S., OPEC's largest market, and you had all the makings of a price spike. So, while the Middle East may not have raised prices maliciously, the region certainly benefited from the events. Take a look at the oil reserves chart, and you'll see that the Middle East is vastly disproportionate source of the world's petroleum. The numbers are astounding. Saudi Arabia is the world's largest producer of oil, with more than 250 million barrels of proven reserves. That's substantially more than second place Canada's 175 billion and more than 12 times the U.S. supply. Now those numbers have changed. What has happened is that U.S. law has allowed for more drilling in certain places in Alaska and different places, and that number of barrels of oil in reserve has gone from, if you look at the chart down here, has gone from 21 billion barrels in reserve in 2010. This is 2019, and 2020. I looked it up. We doubled that amount. So now we're at 43.8 billion barrels of oil in reserve. Now on Saudi Arabia, their surplus has gone down. So they've got about 258 billion barrels of oil in reserve. Now, what does that mean? That means that the USA is producing more oil right now than it ever has in the past. And what does that mean? It means we are less dependent upon other nations for that oil source. So let's say Saudi Arabia wants to jack up prices, say, oh no, we want prices to be higher. The U.S. has a greater ability to say, you know what, we don't need your oil. We're just going to use our own. And so it gets the United States off a dependency upon another nation for a very valuable and necessary natural resource that we have and that they have. If we have very little oil reserves, we're much more dependent upon them. If we have greater oil reserves, we're much less dependent upon them. So what does that mean? It means if we have greater reserves of oil, we can actually keep the price at a more stable and lower amount than if we depended upon somebody else. If we depended upon Saudi Arabia for all of our oil, they could increase prices because they know we would have to pay. We didn't have any other option. But now that we have our own reserves, we don't have to necessarily pay as high because we can just tell them, you know what, we're just going to use our own if we have to. So by having those oil reserves, it actually allows us to have lower prices at the pump. So if you ever look and see how, okay, there are lower prices at the pump because we have our own reserves, that's why. All right, let's keep going. So it says, when combined with huge deposits in Iran, Iraq, and Kuwait, and the UAE, or United Arab Emirates, and other nearby countries, the Middle East oil economy dwarfs even North Africa in production. The petroleum industry accounts for nearly half of Saudi Arabia's GDP and an astonishing 90% of exports. Revenues generated from oil have allowed glittering glass skylines to spring up from Arab deserts, dramatically boosting standards of living in a would-be impoverished region. In addition, oil corporations like Saudi Arabia's national company, Saudi Aramco, have become among the richest in the planet. So you see that God has given the ability for wealth. Even in places that are complete desert, we have found natural resources to be able to produce wealth. Now, the question is, in the next 25 to 30 years, what is that going to look like as we begin to find alternate sources of energy that are more renewable and that we can eventually make to be much more attainable and economical? So I'm going to stop there right here. So you're going to need to read through, let's see, I want to make sure I get to okay. So you're going to need to read all the way through right here on this is page 63, where it says other Asian countries. So you're going to need to read through that. No, but I'm going to start on page 63 right here where it says aside. Aside from being the epicenter of the world diamond production, South Africa has long been associated with gold mines. For more than a century, South Africa has led the world in gold production, harvesting nearly 80% of the world's total in 1970. In 2007, however, China topped South Africa as the world's leader. The two countries now compete intensely. China produced 276 tons in 2007, leading the pack in Asia. Production is mainly concentrated in eastern regions and is fueled by high demand internationally and domestically. To maintain its status as the world pace setter, China must invest considerable energy in the industry. Indonesia has impressive gold reserves, including Grasberg Mine, the world's largest gold mine, though production trails China. Russia has substantial gold resources as well. Many are actually located across the Ural Mountains in Europe, but Russia as a whole benefits from their presence. The poor country of Uzbekistan also produces a surprising volume of gold for its size, good for 9th place in the worldwide in 2006. Other producers included the Philippines, Malaysia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Mongolia. But here's something that we have to ask the question, is that many of these nations have very, very, very valuable resources, but why is it that so many are still facing large amounts of poverty? Why is it that a nation can have incredible resources, but the nation is impoverished? Well, let's look at Venezuela. If you look at the chart, or if you did your previous reading on page 62, one thing it says is that, incidentally, recent research has suggested that the Orinoco tar sands in Venezuela may hold up to 500 billion barrels, which would make Venezuela the world's most oil-rich country by far. Since this writing, that's been proven. So now you have Venezuela. It has the largest oil reserves in the world, the largest more oil than anybody else. They have gold and silver and incredible mining resources. Not only that, they are a Caribbean nation, means that their northern coast is the Caribbean Ocean. Beautiful beaches. They've got the tallest waterfall in the world. They've got amazing jungles. All of these natural resources. Why is it that they are not a prosperous nation? Why is it that they are one of the, if not the poorest nation in the world, facing triple-digit, quadruple-digit inflation? What has caused that? Any ideas? Here's the thing, is that a free market allows for the ability to grow and to have prosperity. And that's what it is that even though other countries may have more or greater resources than the United States and other nations, the United States has a very free market, and we want to guard and protect this because it allows for innovation, it allows for people to move goods freely, and allows people to set a just price for their product. In other nations, prices are controlled. I remember when I was in Venezuela, to be able to get US currency, US dollars, you had to go to a bank and apply for it. You couldn't just get it. Here, or in many other nations, you can go to an exchange house and you can exchange your money for a fee. It's a private business, but the government controlled and owned the banking system almost. And so they controlled the money, they controlled how much it was worth, and they didn't let it flow naturally. When you do that, you try to control, and in that control, it actually ends up hurting your nation. So no matter how many natural or great resources Venezuela has, they're not going to experience prosperity until people there experience liberty, which is the ability to do what is right. The ability, and until their goods and their products are protected by their leaders. But right now that's not the case, because in socialism, essentially, there is no private property because the state always has the ability to come in and take whatever it wants. So there is no protection of private property. And you saw that in Venezuela because more and more corporations were being taken or seized by the government and what they call expropriated, basically taken for the use of the state. And what happened too is the reason that they cannot benefit from the great oil reserves is because their oil industry is in chaos and ruin. What happened is that the international businesses that own these oil companies in Venezuela, when Venezuela began to take things, they got out of the country, and so the Venezuelan government took over control of these things or these companies. And what happened is that when that happened, sorry, I just heard something outside, lost my train of thought. When that happened, they put people into the oil companies that didn't know how to run the businesses and didn't know how to take care of the machinery and keep everything going, and thus it just destroyed their oil industry. Okay, so I'm actually going to have you read from Other Minerals on page 63 to let's see, to actually just the end of the page right here. So this section I'm going to have you read. I'll start down here. Other mineral resources are significant as well. China produces a great deal of silver and most of the world's natural gas produced in Asia. Russia hosts a quarter of the planet's reserves of natural gas, which supplements oil as an imported commodity. So we see also in China, a communist nation that also maintains a lot of control. Their people do not prosper as much as they could because the government controls it, and they do not allow for the people to buy and sell goods at a fluctuating price, what it's worth, what people are willing to pay for it. So that will be it. I'm going to let you finish reading in this section, and that'll be the end of it. It's been almost a 20-minute video, so enough of you hearing me. Again, here's your worksheet. If you have any questions, please let me know. The ones that say reasoning, you need to listen to the video, reason, look through it. If you can't find it the first time, maybe go back a second time and think about it. But other than that, have a good day, and we'll see you later.